phones, Babylons can't crack the code.
Season 1 under head coach Deion Primetime Sanders at Jackson State University has officially come to an end with a record of 4-3 and 3-2 in conference play. Now, this season really came off to a very fast start, and it really stretched all the way back during recruiting, where Deion Sanders brought in the highest rated class for all FCS schools and a record-breaking class for Jackson State itself. This is B. Kelly, back again with another banger video, and in today's video, I will be talking about year 1 at Jackson State under head coach Deion Primetime Sanders. Now, let me talk about the preseason for Jackson State football before the season even started. Now, they had a very short amount of time of practice, just like everybody else did, pretty much preparing for spring football, especially in the SWAC conference, but even more so for Jackson State football, with a new head coach in Deion Primetime Sanders. Going into the season, they only were going to have about a month of practice time with Coach Deion Sanders and his whole new staff at Jackson State, which really is not a lot of time of preparation for a 9-game schedule in the spring, but you really cannot do the most about it at all, especially coming off the very weird year of 2020, and even worse, they even had an ice storm in that area that affected some of their practices before their opening day game versus Edward Waters. Now, their first game versus Edward Waters was a complete blowout and a shutout. This game was not even close, and I remember watching this game because I was interested in watching the first game for the Deion Sanders era at Jackson State, and it was complete, utter domination. The final score was 53-0, and Edward Waters could not compete at all with the new Jackson State squad under Deion Sanders. This first game really impressed a lot of people, and it got a lot of publicity because it was the first ever game under Deion Sanders, and they won it in a blowout fashion with that 53-0 score. That usually doesn't really happen a lot in first games, but I will say Edward Waters is not a very good football team. No disrespect towards them, but they're not really on Jackson State's level. Game 2 for Jackson State would be a very tough matchup, as they would travel all the way to Grambling State and play their rivals that they have not beaten in a while. And this was a highly anticipated game, as a lot of people saw it as a game that was going to be very good and Deion Sanders' first real test of the season. Now, the Jackson State at Grambling State game was very competitive, and it switched back and forth for the most part this entire game. Jackson State would walk away with the W, where the score was 33-28, and they won in a very dramatic fashion in the end of the game, when they forced a fumble when Grambling State was near the final minutes of the game, and yeah, Grambling State was actually about to score, and that touchdown definitely would have put the game away, in my opinion, as I do not think Jackson State would have had enough time to come back and score. That big play won them the game. Now, at this point in the season, Jackson State football was looking very promising, as they were looking really good on both sides of the ball, pretty much at every position. The quarterbacks, the running backs, the receivers, the defense, everybody was firing on all cylinders, and the hype was starting to pick up more and more, especially after this Grambling State win. For their third game in the season, they came back home to Jackson, Mississippi, where they would take on Mississippi Valley State. Now, for this game versus Mississippi Valley State, Jackson State would go into this game 2-0 and would have a lot of momentum going into this game, and they had home field advantage. And they showed up and they balled out, as they would end up winning 43-7. Now, in this game, the Jackson State offense and defense did not miss a beat. Jalen Jones in this game, Jackson State's starting quarterback for the season, threw for 250 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions, while completing 14 of 27 passes. And on the ground as a team, they had a total of 163 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. After this huge blowout win that Jackson State had versus Mississippi Valley State, Jackson State would be ranked inside the top 25 for the FCS level. This was showing a lot of promise under Coach Primetime's first season. They've only played 3 games, and they're already inside the top 25 on the FCS rankings for the first time in about 4 seasons, I believe, and it was really impressive. The hype was starting to become real. People thought Jackson State might even go into the playoffs at the end of the season. Everyone was really impressed, and people were even thinking they might not even lose a game. They seemed unstoppable. Who was going to stop them? Unfortunately, Jackson State would start to get cold at about this point in the season. For their 4th game of the season, Jackson State would take on Alabama State, and they would suffer their first loss of the season, where they lost 28-35. Now, in this game, we would start to see some of the weaknesses of Jackson State football. Now, this was their first true game where they showed a lot of struggles. They did do a really good job on the ground as they rushed for 2 touchdowns and as a team rushed for 170 yards. Jalen Jones had a rough day this game as he threw 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions for 180 yards and completed less than 50% of his passes. And the defense, although they did have 2 interceptions, they gave up a lot of yards, 257 passing yards and 215 rushing yards. It's going to be really hard to win a game when you're giving up that many yards in a single game. It is also worth noting that Jalen Jones in this game got sacked a total of 5 times. You cannot win a game giving up that many yards, turning over the ball that many times, and getting sacked that many times as well, and expect to win the game. If they clean up on some of those things, they definitely probably would have won because, they literally only lost 28-35. That's nothing. That's just 1 touchdown. But all those turnovers, sacks, and just not playing well as a team, it's going to factor in to a loss. Now, for their 5th game of the season, they would take on Southern University, and they would lose their 2nd straight game in a row as they would lose 14-34. Now, in this game, it really showed how much Jackson State really needs to work on the rushing game for their defensive side of the ball and how to stop it. Because in this game, they gave up a total of 294 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground. Now, I understand it's not all in the front 7, even though they only had 2 sacks. The secondary against the pass played pretty well. They only gave 180 passing yards, and they even forced 2 interceptions and only gave up 1 touchdown. Jalen Jones played very well this game, as he threw for 243 passing yards, had 2 touchdowns, and only 1 interception, but he was sacked a total of 4 times. Now, this was the first game of the season where Jackson State really struggled to get the ball going on the ground, as they only rushed for 66 yards and 0 touchdowns. For their last game played in the actual season, their 6th game of the season versus Alabama A&M, yes, I said they would play 7, but they really only played 6, as their final game of the season was a forfeit win versus Alcorn State, which couldn't be played, but it was forfeited, so they won 2-0. Now, in this game, they would be home, and they would play Alabama A&M. In this game, Jackson State would lose their 3rd straight game for the season, as they would lose 43-52. In this game, Jackson State's offense was rolling the entire time. Quincy Casey had a career day where he threw for 323 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. And as a whole, as the rushing attack was pretty good, as they rushed for 140 total yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, the defense, on the other hand, was kind of opposite, but they were playing one of the top FCS quarterbacks in the nation. Look out for in the next upcoming NFL draft by the name of Akil Glass. Now, this guy threw for 440 yards, 6 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. Now, on the ground, their team only rushed for 93 yards and had 1 touchdown. But Akil Glass, man, y'all gotta watch this guy because this guy is a dog. After the forfeit game versus Alcorn State and the cancellation of the Prairie View A&M game that they were supposed to have to close off the season, Jackson State football in year 1 under Coach Primetime Sanders would finish 4-3, with a bunch of ups and downs through the season as they started very hot and finished pretty cold, I would say. Now, for the first year under Coach Prime, I would say it was pretty good and they had a lot of success, but they definitely do have some things they do need to work on as a team. and they should get a lot better with a longer offseason going into the fall. Jackson State's 2021 fall football schedule is Florida A&M, Tennessee State, Louisiana Monroe, Delta State, Alabama A&M, Alabama State, Bethune-Cookman, Mississippi Valley State, Texas Southern, Southern University, and Alcorn State. Before I head off the video, leave down in the comments what you think their record's going to be and any future video suggestion. And before you head out, remember to smash that like button, turn on them post notifications, and subscribe for more videos. B. Kelly, out!